Hi everyone, it's that time of year again. It's budgeting season. Hope everyone's excited. A lot of the time I hear people don't know where to start with setting a budget, particularly when it comes to their top line revenue number. So just thought I'd pull together a hopefully relatively quick video on how I typically recommend you go about setting a revenue budget and how in fact we work with and coach Rockwall clients to set their revenue budgets each year. Now, normally most businesses or most business owners, when they are budgeting and planning each year, they want to grow revenue. They want to increase revenue. And when it comes down to it, there's actually only three ways to do that. You've got to increase your market share, increase your addressable market or your market size, or you've got to increase your prices. All are very relevant and very reasonable approaches to take, and you don't have to take just one of them. You can take a combination of all three. So let's run through those three big ticket items. Firstly, increasing market share. So first of all, if you don't know what market share is, it's how much of the addressable market you are controlling or selling to. Okay, so if you estimated that the total size of your market in Australia was $1 million and you've got $100,000 of revenue, well, you've got a 10% market share. Right now, in reality, that percentage can be very, very hard to actually quantify. Depending on your industry, there will be maybe some available data that you can use to try and quantify that. But the actual percentage itself for this exercise is not particularly important. It is important in other areas, but don't get too worried about wanting to or trying to work out that exact percentage of market share. But if your strategy is that you want to increase market share, and probably this is the default strategy that people think about when wanting to grow revenue or thinking about how they're going to grow revenue, it's basically taking customers off your competition. So how can you do that? Well, you've got to have some sort of marketing plan, particularly. So normally it involves investing in maybe some market research or your marketing team to identify where there's opportunities to win market share. Part of having a good marketing plan is understanding what your value proposition is, how you're going to differentiate yourself from your competition. You can see on the list of points there, investing in innovation, investing in branding, advertising. These are all things that differentiate you from your competition and are going to, if done reasonably well at least, help you grow market share and win business from your competition. The other, I guess, part of marketing is working on your existing customer relationships. So maybe the first thought about growing market share is not losing any. So that it's much, much harder to win new customers than it is to retain your existing customers. So that's probably where I should have started. Is first point is don't lose any customers, at least ones that you don't want to lose, before you go thinking about obtaining new customers. There's other things you can think about around leveraging strategic partnerships. Is there a complementary product or service out in the market with a strong market position and a similar target market that you can work with and maybe come up with some sort of referral arrangement or joint venture type sales arrangement that can really help you grow revenue very quickly. And finally, my final point there, investing in your sales team. So new business doesn't just win itself. Depending on the type of business, you might have no sales team or you might have quite a large sales team. But whether you've got a sales team or not, you do have a sales process. So there is someone at least within your business that must be running that sales process, making sure that person or that team has all of the support and resources they could possibly need will maximize your chances of them winning new sales. Challenges, obviously your competitors can react when you start taking customers from them. You've got to keep up with where the market's going because consumer preferences are really important. And we're going to talk about something on the next slide that's really important around market saturation. Okay, so this is a little bit of a theory of mine. I don't know whether you'll find it in any textbooks, but I think it rings true. Basically, it's pretty common sense, but as your market share increases, every additional percentage point of market share becomes exponentially more difficult to obtain. The reason for this is that your competitors are not just going to sit there, well, most of the time, but they're not going to sit there and let you take market share off them and do nothing about it. So often, if you sort of visualize a bit of a curve where as your market share increases, what I'm calling friction grows at a much faster rate. So this line becomes very steep. Okay, so your first few percentage points of market share, or depending on the size of the market, maybe even more, are relatively easy to win. But as that gets higher and higher, and if you're up around 20, 30% market share or even higher, you control a big portion of the market. Winning more market share generally is more and more difficult. You've got to throw more marketing resources at it. You've got to throw more sales team resources at it. And your competitors are going to react. They're probably going to decrease prices. They're going to invest in their own marketing strategy, or they're going to come out with some innovations that maybe challenge your position in the market. So you've got to be really aware, I think, of this mechanism, and you're thinking about how you're going to grow market share, especially if you already have a pretty solid chunk of the market. If you're already up around 20, 30% market share within your market, so your market could be just a geographic region. So it might be, okay, I've got 20% cabinet making market. Unless you're going to look at our next strategy, which is growing your market geographically, getting more market share could be more and more challenging as you are more successful, ironically. Okay, next strategy is increase. Yes, the most obvious one there is expanding into new geographic regions. So the example I just used, if you're a cabinet maker based on the Sunshine Coast and your target market is only Sunshine Coast businesses, and perhaps the next most logical thing would be, okay, I'm going to try and expand into Brisbane, or I'm going to try and expand north into the Wide Bay region, because that's where I feel that there's untapped market potential. So that automatically grows your market size, and your market share, which is what we're just talking about, in those new regions is zero. Going and capturing a couple of percentage points of market share there is probably going to be not particularly difficult to start with. The other way you can increase your addressable market is selling different products or services. So your market becomes bigger because you're expanding your product range. Okay, so you might have no market share in that new product range, and you're going to go and win some market share. Usually you want to make sure that's not just a random product. It should be something that is complementary to what you already do. And I've got down here in the challenges, entering a market that you're not expert at. Okay, so if you're a cabinet maker, don't go and open a retail shop selling clothing, right? That doesn't really complement each other. But if you're a cabinet maker, maybe a complementary service might be some additional carpentry services, getting into finishing carpentry or something like that. That may make a lot more sense. Okay. You can target new customer segments. This can be challenging, but it depends on your marketing positioning. Let's go back to the cabinet maker example. I don't even do work for any cabinet makers, but maybe at the moment you target the cheaper or more cost-effective end of the market. Maybe a way you could expand, provided you've got the expertise, is also by targeting higher-end homes sector of the market. And maybe that involves a different brand. Okay, still same business, same infrastructure, but a different brand that's targeted at that slightly different segment. Again, strategic alliances. So, that we talked about that in terms of growing market share, but can also be an easy way to grow your addressable market. So, for example, if you're wanting to go into a new geographic region, rather than setting up a whole new business from scratch or a new branch from scratch in that region, is there someone you can partner with that's already there, save you a lot of that overhead, but still give you a presence in that region? Okay. Challenges, we talked about a couple. Regulatory and compliance issues always important to keep in mind, especially if you're not familiar with that market. So you've got to do homework before you look at things like different markets, especially if you're going overseas. If new geographic region to you means we're going to export or have some sort of overseas presence, you've really got to do your homework about what doing business in that new country entails. Often the cultural and legal challenges are much more substantial than you might think. Okay, on to the next one. And this is actually my favorite because it's the easiest and it's also the most underutilized. Increasing prices means that even if you sell the exact same volume next year, you will still grow your revenue. Now, we've obviously been operating in a pretty high interest rate or high inflation environment in Australia for the last couple of years. So if you haven't been increasing your prices every 12 months, in real dollar terms, you've been going backwards. Okay, so it's really important that you keep on top of this at least annually. I recommend every 6 months you do a pricing review. And often when I talk to businesses that first start working with us about this, they're very, very hesitant to increase prices. They think they're going to lose all of their customers. Now, that has never happened. In fact, I've never seen anyone lose a customer by doing a sensible price increase that is well communicated. Okay, so don't just go and increase your prices by 30% with no communication behind it and expect that no customers are going to get upset. But if you have a reasonable position to say, hey, our costs have increased, we think we're doing a really good job, we deliver a great product or a great service, and we think a 3% price increase is reasonable, so we're going to be implementing that next month, next quarter, whatever it may be. I've never seen anyone lose a single customer from doing something like that. And to be quite honest, if you do lose a customer from doing that, it's probably a customer that doesn't really value what you're doing and probably not someone you actually want to work with. As I said, pretty easy strategy to actually execute on and implement, but really keep up that communication with customers. Think about how you can do it, not under the radar, not sneakily, but think about how you can do it and not make your customers feel like they're getting any less value. So maybe there's a way you can package like a couple of products or services together at a certain price, still give the customer value, but actually get ultimately better pricing and better margin for yourselves. Okay. The other point I've got there is look at what your competitors are charging. Now, you don't want to necessarily be competing on price. We want to compete because we're differentiated and we offer a unique value proposition. But at the end of the day, price does play a large factor in a lot of people's decision making. You do need to understand what the pricing environment is in your market. Okay. Yeah, look, challenges there, as we just talked about. Yes, you may lose some very price sensitive customers. I think it's a pretty minimal risk as long as your pricing strategy is implemented well. It may negatively impact your sales volume. There's a whole other discussion we could have about your profit maximizing price and sales volume. It is not always selling as much volume as you possibly can. It's also not charging the highest price you possibly can. There is a sweet spot for every business there that can be worked out. But that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. All right, and a final tip here is when you are setting your revenue budget for next year, make sure you think about what's happening in your industry and in the economy in general. No matter what you do in terms of executing strategy, even if you execute your strategy perfectly, you are going to be impacted either positively or negatively by what happens in your broader industry and in the broader. So read industry reports, read as much data as you can find on your industry. Some industries are easier than others to do that with. Grab a copy of the Fin Review. Well, it's not a physical copy these days. Jump onto the Fin Review website every week, have a look at what the commentators are saying about the macroeconomic forecasts. Think about how changes in the political climate are going to affect you or might affect you. Very relevant at the moment with what's happening geopolitically in the world. And use your historical data to benchmark where you're at. Okay, so understand, like, have I been growing while the market has been stagnant? Or has my revenue been flat while the market's been growing? That can really help you analyze what's driving your revenue or where your issues might be. And this is how you might actually achieve integrating that kind of data into a forecast. So here's a little example. We've got a business here where we're expecting this year we're going to end at about $20 million of revenue. And we're estimating our market size there is about 150 million. So that means we've got market share of 13.3%. We have taken, in this case, some industry data, and we found that the forecast industry growth rate for next year is 5%. So by multiplying out the 5% on our existing market size, we can estimate what the market size will be for next financial year. And then we're going to make an assumption that we're going to grow our market share from 13.3% to 16% next year. Okay, and then again, we multiply that out, and that's given us our starting point for forecasting next year's revenue. So we're saying a combination of industry growth and us capturing more market share, we think we can grow from 20 million this year to 25.2 million next year. On top of that, we're going to use the other strategy, which is expanding our market, and we're going to enter the New Zealand market. We're saying we think that there's a market over there of about 50 million a year. New Zealand's typically a smaller market than Australia, and we think this business can capture in its first year about 3%. Remember I said that first few percent is typically easier to capture. Okay, so as a new entrant, we're going to get there and we're going to capture 3%. That equates to about 1.25 million. Not a huge contributor in terms of our total revenue budget, but this is our first year over there. So we need to be realistic about what you can actually achieve when you are entering a new market. Okay, so we add those two together. It gives us a forecast for next year of 26.45 million. And that equates to 32% growth, that's very high. I know there's a lot of businesses out there that do this sort of growth, quite regularly, but it is high. And I for most businesses, this is not going to be sustainable for more than a few years. So in that case, we're actually going to be conservative. We're going to apply a 10% haircut to a number, and we're going to bring our budget down to 23.8 million, which gives us growth of about 19%. And that feels a lot more comfortable to me. Now, you don't have to use that haircut method. I would strongly suggest you put something in there, even if it's a couple of percent. This is obviously a very high-level top-down process. If we were doing a budget for a business here, we would complement this with a bottom-up process, which is looking at, okay, where is this growth actually going to come from? Because it's well and good to say we're going to go from 13.3 to 16% market share, but how are we actually going to do that? We probably need, if you report that to the board, they're probably going to want to see a little bit more detail about how you're actually going to achieve that growth. Okay, so I hope that helps. That's a very simple example. Hopefully it helps you visualize how you can mathematically, with a very repeatable process, use some external data to forecast or to set your revenue budget. Okay, so quick wrap up. Setting a realistic revenue budget. Realistic is the important word there. It needs objective data, which we've just talked about, and subjective. So don't discount your gut feel. If you've got your finger on the pulse of what's happening in your industry, You probably understand what's going to happen next year better than any accountant is ever going to be able to advise you on. Okay. So trust your own judgment if you're confident in your knowledge of the industry. Be realistic with your revenue budget, even if it means you don't like the number that you end up seeing on the bottom line. Okay. Set a realistic number at the top line, and then if you need to, find the cost savings you need to achieve the desired bottom line result. Don't start with your expenses and a profit target and then set your revenue number to get to the profit number you want. That is a recipe for disaster. Another recipe for disaster, one that I must admit I occasionally fall into this trap. Avoid hockey stick type forecasts or budgets. That means like you budget your first 2 quarters with basically no growth, and then all the growth for your financial year comes in the second 2 quarters. They are typically very difficult budgets to actually achieve. They are relevant for some industries and some circumstances, but as a general rule, I would try to avoid it. And make sure you're supporting the rest of the infrastructure in the business around marketing, sales, and innovation to actually achieve your revenue budget. If you don't invest in those 3 areas, you are not going to generally be able to achieve 20, 30, 40% year-on-year revenue growth. Okay, businesses that do that are investing in those 3 things. Really important. Okay, hope that was useful. If you've got any questions, visit us at the website, or you can actually email me directly. There's my email address there on screen, and I hope that was helpful. Thanks.